All right, so today we're going to be ranking the top 10 greatest players in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this was probably the hardest list I had to make. There are so many legends in the Steelers' rich history, especially in the last, 55 years. That just goes to show how dominant the Steelers have been ever since Chuck Noll became the head coach, and then Bill Cowher and Mike Tomlin after them. The list was so hard. There are so many honorable mentions: Ben Roethlisberger, Terry Bradshaw, Antonio Brown. Several other players got left off this list. I made a criteria to make it easier to understand for y'all as far as what I ended up doing for the Steelers list, just because of how hard it was to make. For me personally, you have to be a top 10 player unequivocally. There's no debate about it. I know some people will have Antonio Brown as a top 10 quarterback of all time. But to me, the guys that are on this list, there's no debating that they're top 10 players by anybody ever. So you have to be a top 10 player at the position all time in my books. You have to have either won a Super Bowl or been the best player at the position for an extended period of time. Um, the magic number for most of these guys was 5 or 6 All Pro selections. There are a few people who don't exactly meet that criteria. Um, but that gets into the third piece of criteria. If you win more Super Bowls, you're more likely to be higher on this list. So as a result, I end up having um, end up having some of these guys higher up on the list due to their success and contribution to a more winning period in Steelers history. But at number 10, we're going to go with Alan Faneca, a guard for the Steelers in the 2000s, 6-time first team All Pro. To me, he's one of the greatest guards of all time. There's no doubt about it. I think most people would say the same. He was the anchor behind a strong Steelers offensive line that won 2 Super Bowls and made 3 rings in the 2000s. Was crucial into helping their run game be as dominant as it was, with some players that otherwise weren't as good on other teams. But Alan Faneca is undoubtedly 10. At number 9, I'm going to go with Dermontti Dawson. He's undoubtedly, to me, a top 5 center of all time. The only real argument is that he never won a ring, but he's an 8-time first team All Pro selection, easily the best center of the 1990s. Key in helping the Steelers make the Super Bowl in 1995, and a big reason to why their run game was so good under Bill Cowher. He comes in at 9. At number 8, I'm going to go with Mel Blount. This is the guy who doesn't meet the for the 6 All-Pros magic number, so to speak. Although he was widely regarded the best cornerback of the 1970s, widely regarded as a top 5 player in his position, if not close to it. Great, and he was the first true complete cornerback in NFL history, in my opinion, at least in the Super Bowl era. A guy who could play man, zone, press coverage at an elite level, could tackle really well, extremely physical, had versatility to even play a little bit of nickelback, which was rare at the time, given that most teams just ran 2 receivers and 2 cornerback schemes. But Mel Blount also won 4 Super Bowls with the vaunted Steelers defense, so he deserves to be on this list without a doubt. At number 7, I'm going to go with Troy Polamalu, former Defensive Player of the Year in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. 4-time first-team All-Pro selection, easily one of the greatest safeties of all time. Extremely instinctive, and a huge reason to why that Steelers defense was so dominant in the 2000s. Helped them win both rings in 05 and 08. Troy Polamalu was easily the best defensive player on that team. At number 6, we're going to go with Franco Harris. Franco Harris, to me, is the best fullback not named Jim Brown. Obviously, he's known for the most iconic play in Steelers franchise history. That would be none other than the Immaculate Reception in 1972. And he was a big reason why they won Super Bowls in 74, 75, 78, and 79. Specifically, more the first 2 Super Bowls, being that the Steelers ran the ball more in those first 2 Super Bowls. Winning winning an Offensive Player of the Year and a Super Bowl MVP award. Franco Harris, of course, having won 4 Super Bowls as well, along with the majority of the players on this list. He deserves to be here for sure. At number five, we're going to go with Rod Woodson. Um, Easily, probably the most versatile, great, all-time great at the defensive back position, cornerback, safety, nickelback, you name it, he could probably play it. The best defensive player of the 1990s Steelers era, with Bill Cowher. And on top of that, I mean, this guy was a warrior. Got injured in 1995, tore, if I'm not mistaken, his MCL. Returned for the Super Bowl and played lights out against Michael Irvin on just one leg, pretty much. The reason why I don't have him higher is just because he didn't play as long as some of these other guys. Um, Not his whole career was made playing with the Steelers, although majority of it was. So I think he warrants enough of a spot to be number five. But at number four, I'm going to go with the guy who played his entire career, all 17 seasons with the Steelers. That would be none other than center Mike Webster. Webster, to me, is one of the top three centers of all time. Easily one of the greatest run blockers in NFL history. Once he got his hands on you, there was no doubt that you were going to get basically mauled if you were an opposing defensive lineman. He was the anchor to that offensive line that was so dominant in the 1970s and 1980s for the Steelers. Um, and I think longevity plays a big role into just determining how good he was all time as far as the center position, being, I think it was a six-time first team All Pro selection himself. Could be more, but I don't remember exactly. But Mike Webster easily is one of the greatest centers of all time and is number four on this list. At number three, we're going to go three and two are going to be both linebackers from the 70s. Jack Ham was one part of that dynamic duo for the Steelers. The other is Jack Lambert. I'll speak on both here. Jack Ham, uh, just one of the best as far as cleanup tackles go, getting his hands on you. Once he got his hands on you, you were going to go down. There's no doubt about it. He has one of the best side to side ranges of any linebacker in the history of the NFL. Was great at reading what the play was going to, what the opposing team was going to do. Uh, he was really the quarterback of that steel curtain Steelers defense in the mid 70s. Um, and he definitely deserves to be number three. And number two is going to be 1976 Defensive Player of the Year. If I'm not mistaken, six-time first-team All-Pro selection, Jack Lambert. Easily one of the most intimidating linebackers of all time. In my opinion, top five linebacker, maybe top three linebacker of all time. One of the hardest hitters. I mean, this picture speaks for itself how intimidating he was with the tooth gap and all. Once he got his hands on you, you were probably going to get killed on the field. There was no doubt about it. He was that intimidating and that much of a force to be reckoned with. He comes in at number two. But at number one, the guy who started it all, had it not been for this guy, he was the first overall pick that Chuck Noll made as the Steelers head coach. Had it not been for him, the Steelers would have never had any of these other players that they had, the success that they would have. Joe Green set the foundation for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1969. Five former Defensive Player of the Year. He was the anchor to that Steelers defensive line that was so dominant in the late 70s. One of the strongest players in history of the game, and definitely deserving of being number one on this list. There are a lot of players who I can very well see arguments to be made to be switched across this list, and I would not be mad at you if you told me that Rod Woodson deserves to be in the top three. Joe Green maybe should be a little bit lower. Someone else should be higher. Antonio Brown should be here. Terry Bradshaw, Ben Roethlisberger. You know, a lot of people can have various criteria when it comes to this Pittsburgh Steelers team. There are a lot of legends that got left off this list, obviously. So let me know in the comments what you guys think as far as who are your top 10 Pittsburgh Steelers of all time.